All right. I tell you what, while the kids are making their way out, I'm going to give you an assignment. Go ahead, take about 1 minute and share where were you living in first grade, what school did you go to, and do you have any fun first grade stories? All right. Go ahead, see if you can get a name while you do it. All right. Hey, Matt, am I on? I think I'm on, right? So, I spent my youth in the inner city of Nashua, New Hampshire. That's where my roots are. I went through the Nashua public school system, and I started in that system in first grade. I went to a little school called New Searles School. And at least in the city of Nashua, most kids would walk because there are schools all over close to your neighborhood. And so my gang and I would walk down the street, cut through the new path that had just been paved, which we thought was pretty cool, and get to New Searles. In first grade, I had one of the most interesting teachers I've ever had, Mrs. Genesso. Mrs. Genesso was not small-sized. She was a full-sized teacher. And as a little kid, I remember feeling so small next to Mrs. Genesso. But I was on Mrs. Genesso's good side. I was one of those good kids that she didn't have many issues with. However, one of my classmates, Alvin Dudley, was not on Mrs. Genesso's good side. And one of my clear first grade memories is Alvin Dudley was the last kid I ever saw spanked in a public school. Mrs. Genesso had it up to here with him because he was giving her a hard time. And sure enough, the full-size teacher lifts him up, puts him on his lap, her lap, upside down. Wow! The rest of the class, we were in shock because Alvin just got spanked. I mean, we didn't see that coming. But there's one thing I remember. I can switch mics if you think that's the issue. Jumped onto my wife's Facebook page and searched, is there an Alvin Dudley out there? And then I realized, even if I found him, I wouldn't recognize him. I don't remember what he looks like. I don't even remember what nationality, other than he was fair-skinned, Alvin Dudley was. I know nothing about Alvin, other than those two things. He was the last kid spanked, and he smelled just like oranges. I am in my mid-40s now. I was in first grade many years ago. Isn't that interesting? That's my memory from 30-something years ago of a kid. I'm sure Alvin has had all sorts of stories in a life, probably a family, a career, disappointment. I'm sure all of that has happened. But for me, it's oranges and a spank. You know, and sometimes, maybe even for some of us sitting here, sometimes our life can get condensed down to one thing. Just one thing. That is one characteristic about us, maybe one tendency that we have, one physical trait, one something that other folks around us summarize our life with. If you have ever had a young kid in your family, there is nobody on the face of the earth that is more honest than a little kid in your house. And so many of you, I'm sure even right now, can see a red spot on my forehead. You know, if I turn and maybe you can see it. Sienna, my 6-year-old, will spend minutes awkwardly close staring at my red spot. Okay? I can't tell you how many times I've answered this girl that I would give my life for the question, Daddy, what is that? As her eyes are right here. Ah! She gets fixated on it. For some of us, maybe it's an ethnic identity that you get labeled a Puerto Rican family. Or maybe it's the occupation we have, that our whole life is kind of summarized by being the professor at Gordon. Or maybe it's our history, that there's one element, one major thing, and we get summarized as the World War II vet. Or maybe it's a physical trait that when people reference you or talk about you, you're the super tall and super skinny one. Or maybe it's a deficiency that you have. Maybe for quite a long time, you've been known as the one with MS, the guy who limps, the one with the speech impediment, the cripple. Over Lent, we have been spending time together, taking a look through the book of John at what does Jesus do with people's shame. That thinking for the possibility that if we can open our doors to let Jesus into the place that brings shame to us, that's hard, that's hurtful, that's a place we don't want people to go. If we can open our doors to experience Jesus' grace, something different happens. And when we experience Jesus' grace right in the place that hurts the most, sometimes we find ourselves finally free to run to Him rather than hide from Him. To run to others rather than hiding from others. Good Friday, this Friday at 7 o'clock, we're going to close up this series. I can't wait until Easter morning to turn the page, to look at the resurrection and the amazing thing that Easter does for folks like you and me and the things in our closet. But Good Friday, we close up our journey. I want to invite you, if you want to come and be a part of that. It's going to be interesting. The Commons Church from Rochester is going to join us. We're going to spend half of our time. It's a fairly short service. So 15 or 20 minutes inside here, remembering, thinking of, embracing Jesus' death. And then we'll spend our last 15 or 20 minutes out at the fire pit in the back field. So I want to encourage you, bring a chair, throw a couple extras in for maybe some of our guests. If you have trouble walking from here to there, we will provide some space to drive you back, and we can make it all happen. 7 o'clock, Good Friday. Want to invite you to join us as we close up our series. Today we get to meet a blind guy. That's his characteristic. That's the one thing for this guy. If anyone walked by him and chose to describe him, that is exactly what they would have said. Yeah, it's the blind guy on the corner of 6th and 9th. Hey, did you meet Tom? Yeah, you know the blind guy that's always begging on the side of the road. This is the one thing for him. A blind guy. He has no name. He has no particular history. We don't know what books he liked to listen to. Nothing about his friends. Nothing about his story. We just know this one thing. He's blind. I want to invite you to turn to John chapter 9. And I'll try to stay anchored right here. My feet are wanting me to wander. John chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. As he, meaning Jesus, as Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? How's that for an opening question? Not like, hey, what's your name? I'm Peter. Oh yeah, I'm Timmy. Oh, Timmy, this is my friend James, and Jesus is here. We don't get any introduction for the blind man, but rather the disciples ask this foundational question. Who messed up? Because someone messed up, because this guy's born blind. And I wonder how many people in his life, when they met him, asked the same question, whether they verbalize it or not. Who messed up? Who sinned? Because you're a product of someone's mess up here. And even Jesus' disciples asked the same question. It's just information they're trying to get. Jesus, who sinned? This man or his parents? Which is interesting when you think about it. Is that a ridiculous question? You meet someone who's born blind, and you ask the question, who sinned? Their parents? Is that ridiculous? Maybe. But don't the actions of parents at least affect their newborns? Oh, moms, don't you pay attention when you're pregnant, what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do? And the reason we pay attention is because the actions of parents certainly can affect newborns, right? So maybe it's not such a crazy question to ask. Moms are supposed to stay away from alcohol during pregnancy. They're definitely supposed to stay out of Brazil. In fact, as you read about this virus, it has women who are pregnant absolutely frightened because they're not quite sure anymore how this thing is being transmitted. Certainly it's supposed to stay off drugs. We all remember those commercials with the eggs. If you've seen pictures of babies who were born to drug addicts, it's really sad. The babies are affected by the actions of the parents. In fact, there's a description. Here's what happens typically to babies who are born to moms who are using street drugs. Okay? Oftentimes they have these: premature birth, low birth weight, smaller than normal head size, heart defects, birth defects, infections including hepatitis C and HIV, neonatal abstinence syndrome. So maybe we can at least take the disciples' question to this blind guy and say, I don't know, maybe mom or dad did something that was pretty damaging to their infant, to their newborn. But himself? Did you catch that part of the question? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? If you follow that question, you're asking, is there some sort of neonatal sin that occurred? Right? So maybe I get the parents. It's a little hard to connect there, but all right, I can fathom that question. But the question about this little kid who's an embryo in his mother's womb, you're asking if that unborn baby sinned? Some scholars actually take this and they look at the story of Jacob and Esau. If you remember that story, Esau's grabbing onto Jacob's ankle. They're pulling, all sorts of things are happening in the womb. They turn there like it's a legitimate question to ask. You see, we as a church believe that we are born sinful, that the inclination of all of our hearts are evil, until Jesus does something amazing. But we certainly don't ascribe choice sin to babies who are in the womb. In fact, later in this passage, this blind man's parents are going to talk about the age of accountability. Meaning, yes, there's a certain age that folks get to have the mental capacity, the spiritual capacity, to answer the question of, what should I do? What's right? What's wrong? Which path am I going to take? That age, sure, it varies depending on the kid. But nowhere are you ever going to find your pastor asking, did that baby sin in the womb? Which essentially is what the disciples are asking. What if someone told you that even in your mother's womb, you blew it? How does that sit? Other than wanting to fight it theologically, which you should, that sits pretty deep, huh? Before I ever even had a chance to sin, I've already sinned. I wonder what this guy's emotional state was. It's not just the disciples. It's everyone passing him, either verbalizing it or not verbalizing it. He's a product of someone's mess up. The assumption of the question is devastating to me. You ever get in that place where you ask a question of, why did I deserve this? What did I do to deserve this? Or maybe you had the thought running through your mind that God must be punishing me or punishing my child for something. It's a heart defect. It's a limiting physical deformity. If you've ever been in that place, I think maybe you can connect to this blind man's thoughts. What did I ever do to deserve this? And then Jesus steps in. Verse 3. Well, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. Don't you just want to say, I'm so glad Jesus was there. You know? Someone who's got a good heart, someone who loves this man, someone who knows the Father, someone who can correct wrong doctrine. Someone with a good heart is standing there. He says, well, neither one of those. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So having said this, he spit on the ground. He made some mud with the saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. All right. Step one is, that's amazing that Jesus could do things like that. Like if we miss that, we kind of miss the whole story. If we try to see beyond that. The first thing that Jesus does, healing this man, God is amazing. Because God loves this blind man. God knows his name, and he knows his story, and he knows what books he likes to read, and the people that he hangs out with, and he knows him beyond that one identity as a blind man. And Jesus has the ability to share God's healing, and so he does. You know, I picture this man, he's blind from birth, so what has he seen? Like nothing, right? He has no capacity to really understand visually how things look, how the world works. And all of a sudden, Jesus spits, makes some mud, puts it on his eyes, says, all right, go to the pool of Siloam. He does. He washes, and all of a sudden, he can see. You talk about new beginnings, right? How many of you went off to college with the thought that, at least I'll have a chance at a new beginning? A new identity. Any of you? All right. I did. I definitely had that thought. There are certain characteristic traits that I didn't like about myself in Nashua. So when I got accepted to Penn State, I decided, it's going to be a new me. I mean, I'm going to be brand new, and I'm going to be a me that I like. And I was the same me in college, because that's typically how it works, right? Or maybe some of us get a new job, and we have that thought, this is going to be a new beginning. I'm going to be a new kind of employee, and pretty soon we're in the same patterns that we've always lived in. Sometimes it's a marriage. Well, if I can just get married, everything will be new. I'll redefine myself. I'll be a good husband. All those negative selfish traits as a single guy, I'm going to leave them behind. And rarely does that happen. So I look at this guy. Well, if there's ever a chance for a new beginning, it's right here, isn't it? A blind man from birth who can see. This guy has a great chance at new beginnings. Except everyone else we meet in this chapter can't get off that one label. You're supposed to be blind. You're the blind guy. You are the blind son. Even his parents get into the mix here. Verse 8. His neighbors, the ones who have known him the longest, are the first. Check out all the questions, the confusion, simply because a man who is born blind can now see. He's not falling under that category anymore. Check out the questions. His neighbors, and those who had formerly seen him begging, asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Well, some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, it can't be. He only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "No, wait, I'm right here. I'm him. You can talk to me. It's me." "Well, how then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. So he replied, "Well, the man they called Jesus made some mud. He put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. Can I just tell you, I love this guy's testimony. Did you see how simple that was? It's kind of like this. Jesus spits, makes some mud, puts it on his eyes, says, "Hey, why don't you go wash in the pool of Siloam?" And so he does, and then he can see. And so he finally meets his friends and tries to convince them, "Yeah, I'm that guy." And, well, what happened? Well, Jesus spit on the ground, he made some mud, he put it on my eyes, he told me to go to the pool of Siloam, and now I can see. There's no N.T. Wright theology here. There's no Harnack's history of dogma that's being worked out. There's no particular position on the gifts of the Spirit, of the miraculous for today. He's not staking a claim on a certain aspect of eschatology or defending amillennialism. All right? He's just let me tell you what happened to me. Jesus made some mud, he put it on my eyes, I went to the pool, and now I can see. I love that testimony. I used to be this guy. You know, the blind guy you're debating? The one I'm supposed to look like? Me? I used to be him. But now I'm a guy who can see. Jesus heals this guy. He changes this guy. And even his neighborhood struggles with his new identity. And he simply repeats what Jesus has done. This man, he has a testimony. Just like you who follow Jesus. Did you know you have a testimony? That there was a time you were one person. A selfish man. A man addicted to something. A woman who always let everyone down. A super negative, critical person. Someone who maybe was in a criminal system. Whatever your story is, you used to be someone. But then Jesus did something amazing for you. And he made you someone new. For this man, it was physical sight. He was the blind man, and now he's the man who can see. And so many of you carry a beautiful testimony that's not necessarily deep and wrought with poetry. It's just a story of what Jesus did for you. I was a mess. I was contemplating suicide. So glad Jesus found me, because now I'm one of the most hopeful people in my family, and I love to share that story. Some of you have an amazing testimony that simply needs to be shared. Simply. Just sharing what Jesus did. Well, then the Pharisees, the religious guys, get involved. Verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Sabbath, if you're a Pharisee, that's kind of the highlight. There's hundreds of things you're not supposed to be doing. Spitting on the ground and making mud, if you can believe it, is one of those rules. I don't know the impetus of the guy who sat down and said, you know what's a good thing not to do on the Sabbath? I think we should make sure everyone knows they can't spit on the ground and make mud. But apparently something happened at some point that the Pharisees got together and said, yep, that is not allowed on the Sabbath, along with these 473 other things. So they hear. It was on a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. Listen to him again. He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. And the man replied, he is a prophet. And these religious guys begin to probe Jesus. And all right, what's this cult? What's this superstition that's gotten a hold of you? That you think you're this new guy? And what kind of strange things have happened? You don't need to raise your hands. But I know some of you, and maybe some I don't know. When you started following Jesus, when you gave your life to be a Christian, when you experienced that new life that came in, folks around you were pretty critical about it. Oh, you became one of them. You're falling for that too? But did you stop thinking? You don't believe in science anymore? Is that how this goes? A lot of you received an inquisition, maybe even from your family, when you started following Jesus. And they're not rejoicing at changes in your life, but they're critical of that statement that Jesus changed your life. And you've walked right through the same kind of place. He couldn't have done that. That's not real. So finally, the parents get involved. Who's been your biggest cheerleader, like throughout your life? For some of us, mom and dad. I mean, they've just been fantastic, even as grandparents now. Maybe even as great-grandparents. Mom and dad have just been like this great, cheerleaders on the sideline. And maybe they were for this guy too at one point. But not anymore. It gets real personal. Because even mom and dad have a difficult time with the new life their son is given. Verse 18. The Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son, they asked? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? Well, we know he is our son, the parents answered. And we know he was born blind. But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. And sometimes those who are closest to you have the most difficult time accepting the new life that Jesus gives. My parents are major influencers for me. But for some of you, you have spent years and years and years praying for your parents, praying for your spouse, praying for your children. Many of you have that story that there's a change in life, and yet those who are closest to me, they don't see it. They won't recognize it. They still think I'm this person over here. And you're just waiting for that day, that time. A spouse, a son, a parent can simply say, Jesus changed them. Without all of the qualifiers, without all of those secondary statements, that your heart is beating. Will there be a day, Lord, that they can simply recognize that you're the author of life? You changed me. Will I ever hear that? That Jesus changed them? Because the parents skirt the question. I don't know. Ask him. Some of you maybe even recently met Jesus. And he has changed your life to where maybe you were a super critical person, and now you're a fairly supportive person, and you're excited about the new place he's given you. Or maybe it's an idol in your life that you laid down for Jesus. Or it was a negative outlook. There was never any hope. And now that you've met Jesus, the hope is beginning to spring. It's beginning to burn in you because the Holy Spirit is living in you. And maybe your spouse has a hard time believing. So when you fail and mess up, because it always will happen, maybe your spouse is there to say, see, I knew you never changed. Some of you are living that life, and that has got to be so hard. So hard. And I want to encourage you. Your identity is in the hands of Jesus. Your identity is not in the hands of those that we love. It's in the hands of Jesus. What he started, he will complete. And the Pharisees come in for round number 2. Verse 24, second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man's a sinner. I want you to see the courage of this man stepping into his new identity. Okay? Here it is. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. So then they asked him, well, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? How many times has this guy answered this question? Like, aren't you tired of the question? So check out his response. He answered, I've told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? When he was a blind man, do you think he ever had the courage to say something like that? But you see, he's not the blind man anymore. He's a man that's been healed by Jesus. And he gets his courage, and he gets his faith, and he gets his hope, and he gives it right back to the religious guys. So verse 28, they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses. But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. And the man answered, well, now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He's teaching his first Sunday school class right here, okay? He opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And that's the end of my class. To this, the religious guys reply, you were steeped in sin at birth. What are they saying? You will always be that guy. Don't give us lessons here. You're the blind beggar on the side of the road. Someone messed up. It was either you or your parents. We're not sure. Don't be teaching me. You'll always be that woman who had that abortion. Don't be all moral to me. You'll always be the guy who criticizes everybody. Don't pretend like you're someone else. So, of course, they throw him out. They throw him out. And Jesus, who we haven't seen since the beginning of the story, he finds this guy. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. When he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Watch the interaction of believing and seeing. Okay? Just going to read the end of this chapter. But notice seeing and believing, how they flow together. "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." And then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What, are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you'd not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." And I don't think what warmed the heart of Jesus most was that this man could see, although I think that made Jesus really glad. I think what warmed the heart of Jesus most is that his heart changes. He believes. He meets the promised Messiah. He meets the promised one of God. He meets his Redeemer. He meets his Savior. And he believes for the very first time. You see, when Jesus said at the beginning, now, it's not him. He didn't have some neonatal weird sin thing going on. It wasn't his parents. They didn't mess up or sin. This is so that the work of God could be shown in his life. Not primarily in the healing, but the vision that he gets. This guy gets confidence, faith, even a testimony. He goes from being a blind beggar to a Jesus witness. And I love the fact that his shame is replaced by courage. His guilt moves over for grace. And of the whole mix, the only one that could see beyond the circumstances to who God intended him to be was Jesus. That Jesus never saw him simply as a blind guy. But Jesus saw a man in whom God had purposes and plans. And it makes me wonder what we see today in our lives. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as kind of that one-trick pony, the guy with the red spot on his head? The guy that everyone says is just mean. Oh, I'm the World War II vet. I'm the sum of my occupation. I'm just the mom. I'm just a single young guy. Is that how you see yourself? Do you think of yourself that way? I'm just someone who has an anxiety disorder. I'm just a kid with ADD. Let me tell you, Jesus sees more. Jesus sees the work of God that can be displayed through you. Because you're more than what others describe you as. You are more than your circumstances. You are more than your limitations. You are a vessel in which the work of God can be displayed. Someone to testify to God's healing. Someone to share the joy with others of God's forgiveness. You are not just that one thing. You are someone that God can use to change generations behind you. To change a community around you. Because of the good news of what Jesus has done. Because sometimes this one thing becomes a safe place to hide behind, doesn't it? Because if I'm just that guy, I don't have any particular adventures lying out for me. I get to be safe here. I don't have to take any particular risks in life moving ahead. I get to just hide here. There's no danger. There's no much of anything, and I'm safe here. And you and I have a choice, and here it is. You and I can simply be the blind beggar on the side of the road. You can be. You can be that guy with that one thing, that woman, that young girl who, I'm just her. You can be the blind beggar that everyone may think you are. Or you get to be the young man, the old woman, the one who says, one thing I do know, and this is it. I used to be blind, but now I can see. Let me pray, and I'm going to invite our elders up to serve communion with us. I'll speak loudly for a minute away from the microphone. We put our communion table up here for a reason. We put it here because this closet, for so many of us, it holds so many things that we're afraid of, that's bound us up, that the shame has caused us to hide, it's caused us to flee, even from the good things that Jesus might want to do in our lives. We just keep protecting it and keep hiding it. And we place our communion visual right here for a reason. That you can see the shame in our lives through the grace of Jesus. That his body and his blood has done something for us. It's taken not only our sin and nailed it to the cross, but it's taken our shame and nailed it to the cross. And you don't need to bear that anymore. That you don't need to hide any longer. And as we do serve communion, we'll give you some space to quietly reflect, to rejoice in what the Lord has done for you. Or maybe to take that first step for the first time to say, Jesus, right now I'm blind, and man, I think I really want to see. I want to believe. I want to move towards you. We'll give you that space around communion to be with the Lord and to hear his message. Let me pray, and then I'll invite the elders up. Father, I thank you that your heart is so big. You pick out this scraggly beggar blind dude on the side of the road. And you displayed your work through him. That's amazing. That's amazing that you would want to take messed up, sick, sinful, shameful people like us and display your work through us. God, I am so thankful that you're such a good Father, that your heart is so kind, that you create new identities in us, that you create new things in us. You give us a heart of flesh. You consider us to be a new creation before you, that you're making all things new. Lord, may you give us the courage to believe that. May you give us the courage to step out in faith, to live out of the identity you've given us, not the shameful identity that others have tagged us with. Lord, for those who maybe don't know you, oh Lord, in your mercy and your grace and your gladness, may this be a day of new birth for them, that they might follow you with joy and fullness all the days of their life. God, thank you for your message. Thank you for your word this morning. I thank you how you'll meet us Good Friday on our hearts long for Easter morning to celebrate your victory over it all. God, thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.